Hello, this is Fiasco, and you're watching Ultimate General Civil War. We are taking a look at the Battle of Shiloh from the Confederate perspective, and we're looking at the second part of the first day. In the previous video, Confederate forces advanced up the field and displaced initial Federal defenses. This video will show the Federal retreat towards the Hornet's Nest, and also Confederate forces advancing up towards Pittsburg Landing. And the game throws us into action basically as it's occurring. Here we have the attached forces from the what is my right corps, and a Union army that's in disarray. So this is partially because of the same kind of piecemeal attack methodology that we saw in the Confederate left, where you seek to imbalance the defender's position by taking a key piece of territory and forcing the defender to react, and when it does, the other portion of your force, the hammer, the anvil, whatever terminology you want to use, looks at that as the opportunity to launch an attack. The effort on the right, so here, is a little less clean than what I was doing on my left. On my left, Confederate forces had kind of a clear angle of approach and a clear series of bunkers to kind of try and take, and a clear position that they could attack from, and you're not really seeing a lot of the same here. So we do have some messy medium range forest to forest fighting, but in this particular instance the quality and frankly quantity of the Confederate troops is winning out. The Springfield 1842, as I've mentioned a couple of times, is a weapon that I'm pretty happy with to use in close-in fighting like this, especially in woods, especially in they're good for your brawler troops. And you have Chalmers and Gibson, and I think Jackson there are going to be kind of the anchor point upon which ultimately both halves of the army pivot, and you're going to see the same thought process playing out here as you did in the day one, or part one, day one video, where I'm seeking to turn the battle into a defensive affair whenever I have the opportunity to do so. And that's just because I like it when my troops can be firing from a covered position. Oh, that's frustrating. Watching that cavalry just sort of ride right through that brigade, Powell. It's kind of a bug you'll see in the game sometimes, where I don't really know what the terminology is. I've heard it kind of referred to as a cavalry pass-through. That obviously wouldn't happen in real life. That section of terrain is what's the body of troops that a brigade of infantry occupies in this game world should not be construed to be a physical manifestation of that many soldiers. It represents, I think, the area that those troops control, and then the individual unit commanders are taking whatever steps they feel are necessary in order to dispose of the troops within that brigade's operational area effectively. And this game just doesn't get to that level of granularity, because you didn't see during the Civil War entire brigades maneuvering as a gigantic block like this. It just didn't happen. We continuously look at reports historically of the era, and it's this regiment fought against that regiment with these two regiments in support and so forth. And a brigade is composed of, at least in this era, regiments. In the modern era, a brigade would typically be composed of battalions, and in the British military, the rough equivalent in this era would have been a battalion as well. And it's just a quirk of the way the American armies on both sides were arranged that on paper all of these regiments, the 22nd Maine or 17th Alabama or whatever, they were all technically one regiment with one battalion. You very rarely saw 2nd Battalion, 13th New York or anything like that. It just didn't happen. So let's say Jackson. Here's an example. He's got 2,100 men, give or take, and there's probably 3 regiments or something in that force. The individual units within that brigade's operational area, Jackson might be deploying a company here and there to kind of cover his flank, and when you detach skirmishers, that's kind of what you see is happening is a collection of light companies, or just a light company by itself is splintering off from the body of the main body of the brigade. Here we see some very messy forest fighting. Sweeney, his brigade holds out a lot longer than I kind of expected he would, and it's probably just because he's massive. But in order to try and clear him off and clean up my lines, because I'd like to have an opportunity for the Confederate forces to rest before I try and make a push on the Hornets' Nest, is I need to clear him out. I just need to get him out of there. And as much as I just 2 minutes ago said I like the 1842 as a medium-range brawler forest musket, in this particular instance, Sweeney wasn't taking enough casualties fast enough that I thought that he would break. So we've stabilized to a degree the Confederate line, and now my intent is to sort of use this copse of trees and rest. My guys are almost certainly tired from just basically an aggressive advance, brawling, and all that fighting in the woods. The Union is disorganized, is exhausted, and there's a school of thought, a valid one, that says this is the opportunity when I should push the attack. But I'm not going to do that. And the game gives you plenty of opportunities like this where you can march your... See, look at Martin. He's exhausted. You can march your exhausted men into the enemy's waiting guns and get them killed. I'm sure it makes a romantic painting or a cool strategy image of the superiority of your soldiers marching into enemy fire and simply out bravadoing it or something. But an unsupported advance over open terrain is, if the mantra of the last video was infantry advancing without recon is infantry advancing into an ambush, the same general mantra should be thought to apply here. Infantry advancing without support over open terrain into a dug-in or at least heavily defended wooded position is simply infantry marching to their death. As good as infantry is throughout military history since basically the invention of war, but specifically as good as infantry is in this game, I mean, they're the backbone of my army. They can slog that fight out, but they will take a lot of needless losses doing it. And so we take this chance here to rest. And Trabue is sort of... I'm trying to clear off my flanks. I want to make sure that this whole block of woods where Jenkins and Trabue are currently fighting, I want that too. Because on an operational perspective, I would like to outflank the Hornets' Nest. I don't want to try and charge up with the open fields and get my men killed in large numbers taking it. And so that's why you see Chalmers and Anderson, and eventually I want to say I get another brigade over there too, forming kind of a task group to occupy the Union's attention on my left within the guards of this map, although overall it's the center. And then ultimately I'd like to take where Taylor's battery is, and Lauman, who's currently kind of hanging out in the open. Those are Union brigades. Ultimately, I'd like to occupy that entire line of trees and fire at the Federals from there. So here's an instance where I'm okay with infantry fighting in the open. Gibson's brigade ran out of cover in the open because they're fresh. They poured a single volley of flank fire into MacArthur to free up Chalmers. And that's where brigades can support each other. I very often will attempt to avoid fighting in the open if it's at all possible. But in an instance like that where one brigade can support the other and kind of really turn things to its tide, I will do so. Here we are, Stewart in the woods. This operation on my right does not kind of go the way I want it to. I would like to scare Stewart off, and he kind of just hangs in there for a long while. So here we're advancing more troops. Gibson and Chalmers kind of operating as a base. I want this whole line, and you'll have to forgive me. It's been a while since I recorded this video, and I had drill, so that's kind of taken my mind off things. I'm fairly certain we take it, but I don't remember if this particular part of the battle is bloody or not. I don't think it is. We take this relatively cleanly, but the far Confederate right is a lot more of a slog than I'd like it to be. And it prevents me from kind of getting that pincher on the hornet's nest that I'd like. Stewart really just hangs in it for the long run, and it's partially because, as I mentioned, the 1842 is a great brawling weapon, but it's not a particularly accurate one, and in the hands of a lot of these AI troops, the AI troops that they give you aren't great. In this particular battle, they're actually kind of okay, but their accuracy is not amazing, their efficiency could use some work, and I haven't had the opportunity to build an effective chain of command that you see on the Confederate far left, and the importance of the efficiency stat in terms of just, all around being good at your job. The importance of rifled weapons, this entire corps, second corps here, or 2 corps, the whole thing, it's smoothbore muskets, and 12-pound howitzers and 6-pound artillery, nothing great. So my infantry on the south here, Jackson and Hodgson and all of them, they've had the chance to rest up. I'm getting everything kind of placed up with that line of trees there operating as the anvil. I want to mobilize the troops I've got and utilize them as the hammer and smash the Federal position from a couple of different angles, so that I know that I'm not going to be able to get at the actual hornet's nest for a while, but if I can hit the Federal brigades from enough different directions, the thought process is that ideally I'll shatter them, which is maybe wishful thinking, but enough of them will take such damage to the point that the brigades are combat ineffective, and then I can advance on the nest without my men just sort of waltzing to their dooms. And we're getting some lucky shots on exposed Federal artillery here, which is just gold. I mean, every opportunity you have to pour, especially musketry, into artillery, you should be trying to do so. I don't know the way that the game kind of handles the mechanics for how effective certain unit types are in certain situations, but for whatever reason, artillery, charging them in melee, which you would think would be kind of a slam dunk, is almost never a good idea. In situations here where you've got, Stone's battery, 73 men, and they're routing, if I charged Statham's 200 or 2070 some men into it, it would immediately evaporate. But you charge fresh cavalry into a large brigade or battery of divisional artillery, and for some reason they don't immediately rout. And I don't know how 500 men with the various detritus and things you use to fire a cannon can be expected to fight off 750 angry sword-wielding cavalrymen, but yeah, there it is. There's some of the quirks and idiosyncrasies of this game. So I don't want to sound like I'm complaining about this particular video game. I do have nitpicks, I suppose, about individual mechanics or individual systems, but the broad strokes, I love this game. And Something Compass in his videos will sometimes reference the Sid Meier's Gettysburg and Antietam games. I played the crap out of them when I was younger, and those games were relatively new, and I was terrible at them. I had no concepts of any of these, relatively basic concepts of military warfare. So the position south of the Hornet's Nest has completely and utterly fallen apart. It was being shelled, it was being musketed, it was hitting musketry from 2 or 3 different angles depending on the brigade. The artillery has shattered. One battery has, I think, completely shattered. One's routing. The Union position is untenable, and so the historical temptation, is to charge my brigades in there and try and melee the Union out, and that just seems like a recipe for massive casualties. And on the one hand, these are AI troops, and so you've probably noticed I'm playing markedly more aggressively with these soldiers, and it's because ultimately they don't carry over for me as far as the battle's concerned. And if these troops fall in battle, there's a chance I might be able to rescue their 1842s. So there's some degree of there's an argument to be made that casualties on the Confederate forces on my right are actually also good. I think it really breaks the immersion. It really kind of ruins the sort of role-playing aspect that I think is kind of what makes this game magical. So I tend not to throw the lives of my men away, but if there's a situation where they're slogging away with the Federal Brigade, and I feel like they're trading positively, I might leave them in place longer than I would one of my own units to do that trading. We're seeing here, I'm just trying to extend the flank of the Hornet's Nests so that I can pour more fire into it from more different directions. Watching the video now, I kind of wish I'd been more proactive about maneuvering my artillery into position. The 12... you get a lot of 6-pounders, and that's not super useful. You get some 12-pounders, also not super useful. But you get, I want to say, at least one battery of 12-pound howitzers. And in this particular instance, this is the kind of terrain, the situation where there's a lot of densely packed infantry, and the game doesn't do an amazing job of mimicking that or modeling that, but a lot of densely packed infantry in a very tight area. That's the kind of the spot where I'd love to artillery that. Case shot or exploding shrapnel on that terrain would be murderous if I was a Confederate artillery commander, pouring fire on Miller's brigades. Like, if you had the ammunition and the shot to spare, I'd just shell them out. Brief, I guess, historical interlude. One of the situations that the defenders in the Ardennes forest during the Battle of the Bulge ran into is that German artillery would be set to explode. They would time the fuses to have the round go off a dozen feet in the air, and that's because the result would be the shrapnel of the shell itself, but also all of the bits of tree flying everywhere, and the dense woods would sort of amplify the already lethal effect of the artillery. And I don't know enough about the Battle of the Bulge to remember, what specific artillery piece the Germans were using there, but probably it was the 105 that they've been using from the start of the war, and that was a very effective artillery piece. And I know that on a macro scale, the Americans ended up kind of out-artillerying everybody else, but it's basically our macro strategy was to just outproduce everybody and just have better stuff, or equal stuff and just more of it, and that was a strategy that we ultimately ended up, as a military power, being able to make good on. So the Federals have been forced to fall back from the Hornet's Nest as they've just been receiving too much fire from too many directions. And I, as a player, and again we discussed the aggression with the loner troops, see an opportunity to set myself up on the right anyway to really prevent the Federals from having a lot of freedom to maneuver in parts of the battlefield. So now I should probably just let my guys rest and let the Union kind of retreat into this weird bubble in the top center of the screen they've decided to operate in. And this is kind of probably a quirk of the AI, because if you look at it from the Union's perspective, there's some dream defensive terrain here that they could fall back into. The forest that I'm moving into would be a great sort of pillbox bunker to move and operate from. But frankly, there's this line of trees, this line of forested terrain that they're currently occupying that they just haven't occupied in kind of a lateral sense. And that I would be, even, you know, with their force degradation and my forces, I would be hard pressed to push into that effectively without spending all of the 23 minutes I have left getting my artillery in position and letting my men rest up and so forth. So, you know, again, it kind of breaks the immersion. In this particular instance, the Union is disorganized, demoralized. Stewart's brigade is still just chugging away. I would imagine if the camera would zoom out, these men would just fall back to their positions at Pittsburg Landing and, you know, ask me to come at them. And I would be obliged to do so, because my failure to kick them out of Pittsburgh would functionally cede this particular segment of the state to them, because they would just be able to keep on using that river and ferrying in fresh troops from I don't know, the rest of the United States. Before I fought this battle, I had done a little bit of research on the Battle of Shiloh. And it's actually an interesting kind of situation. I don't want to say it's a comedy of errors, but it's... Okay, so here we are. There's the next phase. They've decided they want to go ahead and open up the rest of the map. There's a couple of ironclads in the river. Those guys are going to be a real pain in my behind throughout the entire battle. But we finally, for the first time, have access to the whole map. All of I Corps, all of 2 Corps, all of the reserve division, I guess. And so now we can take a look at a broader sense of the overall battlefield. My right, and because of the division of the map, you have clearly 2 halves of a battle going on here. The forces on my right are exhausted, but in a very good position, and the Federals are light on the ground in this particular segment of the battlefield, but they're also closer to Pittsburg Landing. And spoiler alert, they're going to get back there from a combination of A, I don't like the idea of exhausting my men any further than I have, and B, I want this battle to go to day 2. So you can win this battle here. It would be possible for me to get my forces to the flag on Pittsburg Landing and take it from the Union, but I want this battle to go to the next day, because it's just more casualties and a resource that you have to manage as either player. I mean, if you're playing a Union campaign, you also have to manage the manpower pool, but I think it's like doubly important to do so as the Confederates. The Union manpower pool can get rapidly out of control, and the Confederate manpower pool will, I mean, you're going to get a certain number of reinforcements for winning the battles, so you can go to ahistorically large numbers that it's unlikely the Southern economy would have been able to support in one field army, and also maintain fighting forces in the remaining other theaters that they had to fight. But it's a video game. Let's just pretend that I've got French reinforcements or something, or the Brits finally came in on my side. Okay, so we're taking a look at I Corps, and that copse of trees that, okay, well, we're back over to the right. Yeah, the Federals are falling back into Pittsburg Landing. I'm letting them. because just the core is exhausted. I don't feel like it's profitable to press the offensive yet without giving myself a chance to rest, and also, more importantly, having a chance to consolidate my forces. However, on my left, my troops are pretty well rested, and the Union's very much out of position. I see an opportunity to get one or maybe two full batteries of artillery completely out of the game. Barrett, McAllister, and I'm hungry to do so. Here we have another frustrating situation where Wraith has retreated through 1st Infantry. I can't see how that would ever happen, but fortunately I have an opportunity to level up 2nd Cavalry. So 2nd Cavalry, just as a reminder, is a melee cav unit. They don't have carbines. They've got pistols and swords, so they can still shoot, but they're not going to do so terribly effectively. And in this particular instance, they're in pretty favorable... This is the sort of situation where you would want to charge melee cav. You still want to support it with infantry fire. You probably want to try and get 2 in there if you can. I found that melee cavalry is useful in pairs. It's one of those weird synergistic things, and I'm pretty sure it's just the way the game handles melee combat, the math behind a melee combat. So with melee cavalry especially, I'm strongly of the opinion that 1 is none and 2 is 3. It's synergistic, marketing speak, I guess, but 1 melee cavalry brigade by itself is just asking to get killed. 2 working in tandem, especially if you can get charges off from different angles on the same unit, is a murder machine. So here, take a look at 2nd Cav. They've traded 41, 42, 43 of their number for 240-ish, and they'll chase this unit off the map, and all the while just gaining all kinds of crazy experience, melee skill, which is important, efficiency, which is important, and that unit cost me, the money for the horses. I had the pistols, I had the swords, I had the officer, I had the men to spare. The only thing it cost me was the money for the horses. And when this battle's over, and I've taken more casualties than frankly I should have with that particular unit, to get it back up to fighting strength, because I've managed to capture a bunch of pistols and a bunch of swords in the course of this battle, also just costs me the money for the horses. Those cults and those swords are entirely battlefield salvage. So the copse of trees that was my fort in the first video is now still going to be my fort. It's just, instead of kind of being my extreme right and flanking the federal position, now it operates as sort of an extension of my center, and there's a big gaping hole in my middle that I want to fill, and I want to move my artillery, especially the 24-pound howitzers, into a place where they can be effective. And right now, given their position, they're so far out of position to be, effective. The Union is not in a place where they're going to launch offensive operations. So, my typical desire to use artillery as a predominantly defensive tool is clearly going to be misguided. They're wildly out of place. And you want to treat, especially direct fire artillery, kind of the same way as soldiers in later eras would treat heavy machine gun, as a kind of an area denial tool, or alternatively, if set up in advance, an offensive support tool. So I decided to pull back 2nd Cav. Pursuing Wraith over the water there is a mistake, but 500 some odd kills for 1 to 5 kill ratio in the unit I'm pretty happy with it. It's more losses than I'd like, but consider that unit's completely fresh. This is their first engagement. My sharpshooters, I'm getting a cocky with them and aggressive. Those Whitworths are hard to replace, and that's that's a combination of a couple of things. That's me playing the game late at night, so I'm tired. That's this being a long battle, so I'm kind of just not paying as close attention. There's a lot of moving pieces. And it's also me wanting to level the unit up. Skirmisher with sharpshooting type weapon. So this can be as, all the way up to scoped sniper rifles or something. It can be just lethal, amazingly lethal weapons. Units, they'll get 10 to 1 kill ratios or more, but they require a lot of careful management, and in a battle like this it's kind of hard for me to give them the amount of just the cycles that they need. So the right looks pretty established, and now it's me kind of filling in my center to make sure that they don't have a hole that they can push through. Now, one thing I do run into is the fact that I've consumed all of the supply that the right would have access to. So Confederate right, the AI troops, some of them are firing with no ammo. And in this game, losing your ammo is a big deal, but it's not the end of the world, especially in a battle like this, especially with AI troops. So what happens is you fight at the same effectiveness as you would have fought, however, you receive a pretty hefty rate of fire debuff, and I don't know the exact number. I want to say it's 2/3, which is pretty heinous. But the unit's still able to find rounds and shoot, and I'm sure the game kind of abstracts that as the dudes are scavenging rounds off of their buddies, or maybe they're getting rounds off of Federals whose positions they've overrun. I'm sure both of those things happen historically. Somehow or another, they're firing rounds they've found, and it's not like they're just yelling strong language at the Union. But that significant rate of fire penalty is going to majorly affect your ability to keep the morale of the enemy down. So a lot of the way that you kind of can create effective offensive warfare is to shock 1 or 2 units into kind of that staggered fire. So roughly 50% morale. We talked about this before, where they don't fire organized volleys. They kind of stagger off a shot here and a shot there. So you want to shock 1 or 2 units, and then you don't even need to do anything else. Like, ideally you shock them and then they rout and they fall out and they create a hole. But even if you don't do that, even if you just shock them and then you put your fire somewhere else, that's 1 or 2 units that's a significant portion of the line not contributing meaningfully to the overall engagement. And that's where you create that force imbalance. And you can push into it, you can decide you want to go ahead and do the melee build, and you can push your guys into that hole so they can't offer, effective counter infantry fire, whatever kind of how you want to play that. But a unit with no ammo, regardless of its actual morale level, so I have my carbine cav pick up 2 supply convoys, or supply caravans here, and I think that I'm pretty sure I farm all of the supply off to allied units. So there's some argument to be said for not spending captured supply, because Something Compass has illuminated me to the fact that captured supply basically directly converts to cash at the end of the battle. But I feel like you get enough money, and effectively winning the battle and killing things is, I think, of more use to me. So Union's pretty heavily outnumbered. Their forces have been majorly degraded. Looking back at the whole battle, as we have an opportunity to do so here, they're attempting to concentrate their forces around the flag and around the trench works in Pittsburg Landing, and I'm only too happy for them to do so. The AI is almost certainly going to... There's a Shadow Brigade, fantastic. And that's all skirmishers doing that. That's all just detached skirmishers and a volley from 1st Dragoon, 1st Mounted Infantry in the rear there. The Federal position on their right is very precarious. 2 batteries shattered. I want to say 2 or 3 brigades of infantry shattered. All the cavalry that was on that part of the battlefield shattered. Here my skirmish cav gets drug into melee, and I think I have a hard time getting them out. It's not like I can do the same trick that I would do with infantry, where you can quickly detach skirmishers, and it will sort of magically reform the brigade, and then you can reattach the skirmishers, and it'll be like they were never in melee, and then hopefully they can pour a volley. And it's possible that I decide that first mounted infantry's kill-death ratio is favorable enough that maybe I should let them fight it out. So here 3 brigades are pushing into the Union position, and this is the exact same strategy that I utilized on the first phase of the battle, where I want to use this copse of trees, this line basically of trees, and I'm forgetting about the ironclads who are pouring grape shot into me. So this is not actually a good plan. But if they weren't there, this would be a great plan. I just completely space because I can't see them, and because again it's late, it's a long battle, and sorry, I'm human. This would be a good plan, is to establish a position there, and then hopefully the Union decides to displace some troops to kind of deal with that fact that I've penetrated their position, and then utilize that opportunity to charge somewhere else. Alright, so yeah, me meleeing with the cav and then providing some support fire from these 2 admittedly very damaged brigades. It's cost me an officer. Now, thankfully he's only wounded, not dead. He'll be back at the end of this battle because let's talk about that. So if an officer gets killed, I mean, that's it, kaput, gone. And you just sort of, it's just kind of a random chance. Whenever a brigade gets shot at, there's a random number generator somewhere in this game, in the engine, that says, does Major Martin or Brigadier General Gladden die? And they might. They just might. You know, it's just you could in the opening salvo of the battle, the RNG generator might just decide, nope, this is not his day, and you could just get shot by 1 unit of skirmishers, and theoretically speaking, it's possible your officer just dies. The math changes based on the status of the unit. So melee significantly increases the chance the officer will die. Melee while routing is all but a guarantee that the officer will be dead or wounded. Infantry fighting against other infantry in good order is pretty good odds your guy's going to be okay. You know, it's fog of war. Anybody has a chance of dying at any point in time. But expect to take the losses in your officer corps. It's always important to try and groom a large body of experienced officers above the rank of major. I like to have a lot of light colonels, a lot of 1-star generals, because they can kind of fill in for darn near anything. So let's talk about what I'm trying to do here. I don't want to capture that flag if I can avoid it, and I think I do trip up and actually do capture it towards the very end of the battle, but fortunately I don't actually capture it long enough for the victory timer to tick over from contested to controlled. So I don't want to capture that flag, again, because I want this battle to go into the next day, but I do want to significantly outmaneuver the Federal position, and they're getting fresh reinforcements on my far right, and I think just now realized it. So I want my troops to be hitting them from as many sides as possible, basically milking kills, essentially. I'm milking experience. I'm trying to milk out the XP, the guns. I want to keep their manpower pool in check. There's no reason not to aggressively seek casualties whenever you can. And you know, we talked a little bit about schools or theories of assault, theories of offensive operations, so forth and so on. In the Civil War, in the Napoleonic War, and World War II, basically in the modern era of warfare, especially industrialized warfare, which I would argue the Civil War was one of the earliest examples of, on a macro scale. One cavalry brigade is captured, another infantry brigade is shattered. McDonald, sorry, it's kind of hard to read. He's about to shatter. Take a step back from my macro historical strategy discussion. Over there, those infantry brigades that are shattering on my far left, that's where the Confederates ultimately wanted to push the Union to. They wanted to destabilize them from Pittsburg Landing and push them into the swamps, so that they could either capture them or kill them, probably capture, and sort of take this whole army and get it to surrender. Ultimately, the terrain, and this battlefield's a pretty close representation of the battlefield as it was historically. The terrain and situation, the way the battle unfolded, the Federals kind of fell back to Pittsburg Landing, and that was what the Confederates didn't want. Because exactly what happens here is exactly what happened in the historical battle, is the Union falls back to Pittsburg Landing, the Confederates aren't able to displace them, and then a steady stream of reinforcements from the other corps of the Union force landed via the river or marching further south themselves, reinforce and ultimately turn what was a defensive battle into a counteroffensive position for the Federals, and then ultimately they take the field, and it becomes a Union victory. A bloody, messy one, but a Union victory nonetheless. And so they wanted to push them into the swampland, and I don't know if anybody watching has ever tried to walk around in swamps under kit, especially if you're trying to move in an organized tactical fashion, especially if you're trying to coordinate fire. If the Confederates had managed to pull that off, it probably would have gone exactly the way they wanted. So I've got the Union boxed up here, and this is a pretty bloody fight here, and I'm trading blows with them, but the trading is occurring on a pretty favorable term for the Confederacy. They've got troops who are in defensive works, which I've talked about being death traps, and I still maintain are. They're getting reinforcements from the north. They've taken approximately 15,000, 20,000 casualties, and we're trying to get as many of these as we can. The dream is for day 2 for me to not have captured the flag, for there to be a tiny token force of Federal troops here, because if they're all routed, day 2 won't come, and then for the Federal forces in day 2 to only be, one brigade. if I got absolutely lucky, it'd be one understrength unit of artillery and whatever official reinforcements they get at the start of day 2. So Buckland's been just hit from too many sides at once. All of their troops who are currently occupying defensive works have been pushed back. So it would be feasible for the Confederacy to swarm the position and take the flag. But again, we've got 8 minutes. I don't want to do it. Ammon on the far north there with Trabue, he's pinned. They're in good defensive works. The Union is in a good defensive position. I've actually fought this battle as the Union and basically fought where they are. I decided to not use the trenches and just use these trees here as basically natural trenches. I forced them to fight me over the river and take casualties that way as a Union, and then I fell back to these trees and let them just break themselves against my dug-in and well-rested troops. But this is the Confederacy. So I'm using the attached forces to swarm the woods, especially because Sweeney here is trying to take those earthworks, and we've got too many troops who are rested and ready to go, ready for them, basically. Where I'm running into issues here is I can't get a front wide enough to get an effective lane of fire on all of the Union infantry. So I'm not really happy with how this part of the pursuit phase goes. I'm pretty convinced that at this point we've broken the Federal Army. It's in retreat. It's condensed into a tiny portion of the map, trying to retreat into terrain that, as far as this game is concerned, doesn't exist. And their position at Pittsburg Landing is untenable. They wouldn't be able to defend it. They're taking more casualties than they're giving by a long shot. And a lot of what's me being aggressive here in this Copse of Woods is, A, I want to deny... Yeah, so there I take Pittsburg Landing, but there's 0 minutes of battlefield time left, and I would need to hold it for 20 minutes before it would tick over to the Confederacy has secured Pittsburg Landing, or controlled Pittsburg Landing, or whatever term the game uses. So it counting as contested at this point in time, when this battle ends, we will go over into day 2, which is fine. So I'm pushing as hard as I am on the Federal left, because the block of trees that all that artillery is in, I want it, not because I want the flag, but because I want to pour musketry into all that artillery. I'm hungry for guns. I want to add more artillery, especially as I build up to the Antietam campaign. Or, you know what, I think Second Bull Run is the next big battle. I want to add more artillery as we build up. So I'm hungry for those guns, even if I know I'm not going to get a lot of that infantry. And I'm aggressive with a lot of the allied troops, not allied, but attached troops, because they don't carry over to the next part of the battle, or to the next part of the campaign. Like I don't keep them. So Lauman, a small Federal brigade's been drug into melee. It's gonna... Oh, okay, before anything happens. So, we take a look at the pre-battle screen going into the next part of the day 2. Always, this is why it's important to have a bank of reserve officers. You can replace casualties. So, 1st Mounted Infantry had a officer go down, and we can replace him. Had I lost other officers, had I been less careful or less conservative with my troops, I could have replaced them as well. No, it would have been officers. It would have been, majors, not colonels or generals like I'd like, but it would have been better than nothing. And if there's no officer there, it's not like the unit's unled. I assume it's probably just the company commanders, or the, a particularly senior NCO takes charge. And yeah, I'm sure someone's leading them is just kind of, he's new to the job and not really sure. So the game is encouraging us to flank to the far right, and I think that's actually kind of a good idea, because there's the gunboats in the river that I had forgotten about in my initial push. So we're just sort of lined up here, and I expect that the Union will likely come to me, and so I'm using the terrain as kind of defensive, earthworks, right? We treat the battlefield for the First World War. I want trenches. Ultimately, I'm going to try and push into that big block of woods that goes up towards the flag, and I'm going to try and use that triangle as kind of my salient. But I also want to use my troops on the far left here to secure all of these lines of trees, these very great overlapping defensive positions. And so we spend a little bit of time here kind of getting everything lined up. This is the first part of any one of these battles, because the game just kind of dumps your stuff into a weird straight line. It doesn't take into effect the terrain or what you're trying to do with stuff. You got to pause, issue your initial orders. I've seen some people just jump in, press play and start issuing orders and going, and that's, ineffective. It doesn't seem to me to break the immersion that, over the course of the night, individual unit commanders would have gotten together in a big tent, and, General Ames there would have said, all right, Colonel so-and-so, you're going to go ahead and take this position there. So here I am flanking with my far left with Jenkins, and I'm going to get kind of a wolf pack of all three of those cavalry units together, and the intent there is I want to make sure that the Federals don't try and counterflank my left hook. And I discover that they are, in fact, doing exactly that, trying to take the field of the offensive and also trying to spread to the far left. So Jenkins is used here to keep a line of sight on things. He doesn't have a great set of tools. I'm pretty sure he's got a basic carbine, the musketoon, which is a pre-war relic. And so ultimately the position that C. Anderson right there by General Breckinridge and Pond, ultimately those troops are going to push to the tip of this little arrowhead pointing towards the flag. But we're going to allow the Union to come at us first. So there's my cavalry wolf pack. Definitely bruised over the course of this battle, but I would say in pretty good fighting condition. Jenkins down about 150. Everyone's down about 200 or 300, depending on how aggressive I've been with them. First Mounted Infantry is the worst off, which is a shame because they're my oldest unit, but the game gives us a new unit of cavalry, Forrest, which I'm assuming is Nathan Bedford Forrest. Unfortunately, he's got terrible equipment in this game, or this particular battle. He's got like a sawed-off shotgun or something useless. So my center is pretty stable, I feel. The center's good. But now it's incumbent upon me to aggressively seek to push my line left. I'm not terribly worried about one single brigade coming over to the left, but now it looks like Hare is as well. And can all those cavalry units deal with Miller and Hare? Probably not. And I'd like to use all of these wood lines to outflank the Federal position and hit it from its, I guess it's right. Especially because where all of my troops currently are, they're in great defensive terrain, but to move anywhere they have to do so over open terrain, and I don't like doing that if I can avoid it. So first cavalry is distracting Miller and pulling his attention to the front while Jenkins tries to harry its flank, and second infantry with Lorenz's, so they're a very accurate unit, just pours fire, and Miller is like, alright, I've had too much of this. He's fighting in the open, of course he is. But now my position is flanked by Hare. I get cocky with Jenkins, and it costs me a couple of cavalry guys. Yeah, I was surprised at the AI's attempt to kind of turn my left, their right into a battle. It seems like until they'd kind of achieved any kind of numerical superiority or dealt with the forces immediately to their front, there's not really a good opportunity for them to operate there. Oh darn. There's a big brigade, and then there's Rousseau and Veith, or Velch. So they've gotten some reinforcements, some big reinforcements too. Evidently someone decided they want to take the flag, but I don't need to actually hold that flag down there. So Larkin Bell Field, they can have it. Alright, let's continue extending my left hook. And basically, I want to move my troops from a position of cover to a position of cover. So it's kind of that whole leapfrog process. The right is more just kind of a naked slogfest. I want them to exhaust themselves battering needlessly into the brick wall that is my defenses. And Jenkins is over here. He's low morale, so I don't want him to fight anything. Jenkins is kind of reconnoitering the Union position, and that's one of the key skill sets of the cavalrymen in this era. Is, I mean, the speed, right? Again, how I'm getting real-time data from Jenkins, he's got a radio. But it tells me I'm in danger of being outflanked. You know, that one 2,000 man brigade, if it hits the extreme left flank of my line at the right angle, it could cause me some serious grief. But recon, I'm aware of it. And they're operating now in swampland while I've got elevated covered positions. So in the hands of a different AI, that particular maneuver could have been seriously dangerous. But the angle at which they decided to attack, and they're also kind of unsupported. It's just them as far as I can tell. Infantry will win you battles. They will deal with unimaginable abuse, unimaginable punishment from enemy fire. They will take it and smile and then ask for more, and then proceed to win you the battle. But if you send them in to any kind of engagement, like poor Whitney's boys, unsupported, they're just going to fall apart. Put up a good fight while they're doing it, though. So good job on 11th Infantry. This is also their very first battle. They've crossed 1,000 kills. And this is one of the things I kind of like about this naming convention, is I kind of have an idea of the story of my army. So, you know, 1st Infantry, 2nd Infantry, if they make it all the way through the end of the war, I kind of have this sort of RP thing. I like to have one of the 2 units that was with me in the tutorial battle, 1st or 2nd Infantry. I like to have one of the 2 of them capture the flag in Washington or Richmond, as the case might be. Just because I feel like they've earned it. You know, and by that point in time, they're usually 3-star units with, you know, the best possible gun and all this kind of silly stuff. But what I talked about earlier, kind of what makes this game special, there are a lot of really good strategic games that drop you into the position of the battlefield commander on the ground in a certain battle. And there's a, you know, it depends on presentation and all that kind of stuff. Plus, it is a huge Union push to the south from their line, just a big frontal attack, which is perfect as far as I'm concerned. You know, please come at me, just come right at me in a straight line. There are a number of battles that put you in that position as the commander, and you're, you know, Rommel in Africa, or you're Monty in Africa, or you're Monty again in Sicily, or you're Patton, you know, in Sicily, MacArthur in the Pacific, you're Yamamoto with the fleet in the Pacific, you're anybody, right? You're Lee at Appomattox Courthouse, you're Lee in the wilderness. There's plenty of these battles that put you in the place of commanding somebody else's troops, and the Total War series of games kind of does this as well. And it's not surprising that the people that made this game came from modding Total War. You can see a lot of the influences. You build an army, and you tell its story of its army, and you start that army up from nothing. You know, 2 tiny, shitty brigades of infantry, and I think some ancient pre-war cannons, and you know, you turn them into this lean, mean, you know, war-winning machine. And it takes the history and plays a little fast and loose with it. Like if the game stuck to hard and fast orders of battle for the Confederates and the Union at the individual fights at Gettysburg or Shiloh or Chickamauga, there wouldn't be a lot of replayability. You would just know, okay, it's 343. There's going to be a unit coming over this ridgeline here, and you play it once and you'd win it, and that'd be it. The variability of you being able to build your own core and multiple core, and the AI scaling up to meet you in terms of manpower allocation are the two things I think that make this game particularly unique, because there are a lot of viable builds. So what I'm doing right now with the Confederate Army, this is called the Big Army strategy, and it's pretty common. It's a pretty basic strategy, and essentially it's about getting your units to be as big and effective as possible, because you're trying to essentially you're seeking aggressively to cause as many casualties as possible, and the way that you do that is by getting big so that the army scales with you. And then every single Union soldier I kill, or every single Confederate soldier that I kill or that gets killed, has a 0.0% or whatever it is chance to drop a musket, and so give me a free weapon. And it has a chance to, you level up your troops and you get experienced armies and you get all that kind of stuff. So you can fight this war however you want. Within reason, right? You can't not fight Shiloh. You can't choose to decide, what, Gettysburg doesn't seem like a good idea. You have to fight the big battles. You can choose to skip the side fights. You can choose to skip to just not take Little Round Top. You can just choose to be like, Pickett's charge doesn't seem like a good idea. I'm not going to do it. And as long as you hold whatever the victory objective is at the end of the battle, and I'm pretty sure you probably do actually have to do Pickett's charge, because if I'm not mistaken, the Gettysburg fight, you need to hold the round tops so that you can place artillery on them and outflank the Federal position. And that's an elevation question and 3D thing. Equally viable from the Big Army strategy is building a coalition of lots of very small hyper-elite units. And anything in between, and you can go with sort of a medium build, where I've done that before, where you spend all your money on equipment and you just you buy as many veterans as possible, and you have this hyper elite, hyper advanced force that outkills the competition by a huge margin. Or you can just kind of go that Soviet human wave strategy, especially as the Union. And it is kind of fun to put the game on easy or whatever, and just generate huge swarms of inexperienced green recruits wielding as whatever weapons you can get your hands on. Just swarm the battlefield. It's needlessly expensive, and you take horrendous casualties, and I wouldn't recommend it for any serious playthrough, but it is amusing. Anyway, so this is my Battle of Shiloh, and because of the way that I built this army, this is a different take on the Battle of Shiloh than usually I've played it. So usually I'm playing hyper aggressive, and usually I want to win on day one, so I never get here. I don't fight this battle, but I've watched a lot of other content producers for this game who have helped to teach me some of the mechanics and the way the game works, and so I'm approaching the game from a new perspective, and it's really an interesting challenge. Some commentary on the battle as it's unfolding. The Unions come out of their trenches. They've launched a pretty major offensive. Their right hook, it's pretty heavy. 5, 6, 7 brigades of infantry coming at 3, maybe 4 dug-in Union or dug-in Confederate ones. However, I'm pretty confident I'm going to be able to hold that. My guys are in cover, theirs aren't. They have to cross a river to get to me, and I don't have to move, so I can be rested. And each of the people on that position, with the exception of 11th Infantry, has a star. And I have to believe that, with a 1,300 to 300 kill-death ratio. 11th Infantry's got themselves a star coming up. So the Union, I'm not seeing any stars. They're all green troops, they're all inexperienced, and they're all in the open or having to cross rivers to get to me, receiving fire from a number of different directions. I'm pretty confident that the 3 brigades I've got there, or the 4 with the support from 9th on the far left, they're going to be able to hold that. And they're pushing down through the center. 10th Infantry, 4th Infantry, some of the Allied troops, Hodgson's brigade, taking the brunt of that. But again, I'm in cover and they have to come to me, and I'm seeing 1 star. Ammon's brigade is the only veteran Union brigade I see on the table. Oh, Marsh as well. 380 guys. Yeah, I'm very nervous about that, let me tell you. And in the last hour, hour and a half of game time, that's when I start to try and take the objectives seriously. So you're seeing there me charging Sweeney's defended position. There's a little bit of a discussion to be had. And we'll do it kind of more in depth when we do Gaines's Mill. We'll talk about how you want to attack a fortified position, or how you want to attack dug-in troops, so that you get the least number of casualties. And if you have the opportunity, you do that by outflanking them. Maneuver and fire, maneuver and fire. And if you don't, essentially, like even in this game and even in this era, especially this early on when everyone's still using muskets, the classic Napoleonic flying column is how you do it. So a wave of skirmishers in front, and then 2 or 3 brigades of infantry just rammed into a very small point to force a toehold, and then they just kind of wrench outward from there. So I've got my cavalry, now I'm bringing them back. Because the weight of forces of the Union position is too much infantry, and they're in too favorable terrain, that I can't use the cavalry effectively. And I'm pretty sure they sit most of the rest of this battle out, because there's just not going to be an opportunity to use them effectively. There aren't any supply carts I can steal, it's just all that. But I am pushing up, again, aggressively trying to hunt down artillery. Bait the Union into attacking me, turn this offensive battle into a defensive battle whenever you have the opportunity. And I have seen some people play this battle in a much cleaner way than I have, but I'm pretty happy with the execution. I take more casualties than I'd like, but I'm pretty sure that the lion's share of them are suffered by the Allied troops. So I'm, again, a little less concerned about the overall casualties in this particular battle. You've taken the flag. And now I guess I do actually send the cav back to just make sure that I have all the flags. I think I do end up kind of ending this fight with all of the objectives under Confederate control. And I've been criminally derelict with the management of the artillery on the right flank, and I think a part of that is because they're loner troops, and I think that I have been much more careful. I mean, you look at the numbers of casualties suffered. I've been much more careful with my troops than I have with the AIs, and I think I've also been more careful in placing the artillery in a position where it can support. But now it's all about closing the news. Now it's all about denying the Federals any good defensive terrain and making sure that they've got no clear access to the flag, and also that I'm not standing there taking canister from the Navy, because it's not a good time. Okay, and so I don't actually end up fighting this all out. 32,000 and change, 33,000 and change for the Union, a little over 12 for the Confederacy. Great kill death, even for a lot of the Allied troops, and just a whole bunch of promotions. And unfortunately, I'm not aware of which one of these are mine and which one of these are the AIs, but there's Cable. I saw Sam Cable. He's been with us since the tutorial. I don't know why I've just latched onto that particular guy. Was it 9? I've captured 8,000 42s, a whole bunch of 30 12-pound howitzers, which is just great. Rescued some of the Lorenzes. So you've been watching Ultimate General Civil War. That was us finishing the Battle of Shiloh. In the next video, we're going to do the camp after the Battle of Shiloh. We've got General Johnson and a bunch of money and a bunch of reinforcements to launch into the next campaign, which is the lead up to, I'm pretty sure, Gaines Mill. And thanks for slogging this through. We're done with Shiloh, thank goodness. That's the first big hurdle for the Confederate campaign. It's the first major battle for both players, actually, Union or Confederate, and it's sort of make or break for your campaign. The next major hurdle, in my opinion, is Antietam. That one is also kind of a mess. So we'll see you soon. This is Fiasco signing out.